Hey everybody, welcome back. Let's get right back into grinding this sword. So I went over to Steve Morley's shop to use his integral grinding platen because mine hasn't gotten here yet. That did a real nice job just cleaning out and grinding that transition from the bolster to the blade. Now that I've got that ground, I can go back home and use my just flat platen to keep grinding the flats on the blade nice and even and flat all along the whole length. And then once I've done that, I can move on to grinding the bevels. I'm just starting off with a pretty fresh 36 grit belt just to get everything dialed in, and then I'll step it up to a 120 grit belt, and then a 220 grit belt, and then probably like a 320 equivalent Trizac belt before I begin hand sanding. And this is definitely the most difficult thing I've ever had to grind. In general though, I'd say I really enjoyed grinding this sword. I mean, it was kind of a pain, but I learned a lot, and it was, I don't know, there's something kind of enjoyable about the challenge of doing something you've never done before, even when it's kind of stressful. I wish I had like a bigger tub of water I could cool the sword in, but instead I just kind of had to dip it in the bucket and kind of wash water up with my hands. It seemed to work alright. So I decided that I wanted to make a 1-inch platen to grind that kind of inside curve. So I'm taking my old flat platen and I'm cutting about a 1/2 inch off of either side to make, a 1-inch platen that I can use to get into that smaller area, just because a 2-inch wide platen kind of got in the way and I was more likely to hit things I didn't want to hit and I had less control. So the narrower platen with like a ripped down inch wide belt is going to really let me grind that kind of weird tight area easier. I'm really glad that I made this 1-inch platen just because it really made this a whole lot easier. I could really get in there without worrying about bumping one side or the other, and I could really just grind the places I wanted just easily, and it was really just kind of great. Last step I do before hand sanding is actually sharpen the blade. I'm convexing that edge in with my nice rotary platen there. That way, after I hand sand it, it's pretty much sharp already. I mean, it is sharp already. I cut myself on it a few times. That way, when I actually do sharpen it the final time, I don't have a big old secondary bevel, and it also makes it cut a lot better. I really like this sandpaper. It's got this adhesive backing, so when I stick it on my sanding stick, it'll just stick on there and I don't need to use any like spray adhesive or anything. It's a lot easier than having to hold it on there or anything else, and it's just really nice because you can just stick it on there and you're good to go. So, obviously hand sanding, whole lot of fun. I'm grinding some notches in the tang, just so that when I glue it up, the epoxy is something to hold on to, and it's going to be more mechanically secure in the handle, which is always a good thing, because, you wouldn't want it to like fly off the handle. That'd be pretty bad. I like to mix some black epoxy dye into my G-Flex epoxy here. That just makes sure that if for some reason there's a gap in my fit up, that'll get filled and it won't show up in the end product. I like to use this G-Flex epoxy. It's just a marine grade, super tough epoxy that sets up overnight. I like it. It works. It's super tough. So I'm just gluing it up, and because I cut the end of the handle already at an angle, I made up this little block that'll go on there so that when I clamp it, I can clamp it nice and square. And it's actually kind of nice because even though this is a really long sword, the curve of it makes it so that I can clamp right on the vise because the blade kind of dips out of the way. The first step to my handle shaping process is just to kind of roughen the profile of the handle. That way I can kind of get an idea for how it's going to fit in my hand and what the shape's going to look like. Once I've done that, I'll go over and do some layout lines so that I know kind of what would be in line with the blade and what's, I guess straight in comparison to the blade, so that I've got some references to work off of when I'm dialing in the thickness and that kind of shape of the handle in the other dimensions. When you're grinding both wood and metal, like here with the bolster and the wood, you've got to be really careful that you don't accidentally eat away the wood and leave the bolster proud or whatever, because that looks bad and it feels bad. So whenever I'm grinding that transition, I'm being really careful to apply more pressure on the metal and less on the wood and just kind of feather it out so that I don't get any weird dips. I'll grind the corners off at like a 45-degree angle, and then I'll go back and knock the corners off of what's left of that, so that I'm working from kind of square to octagonal to whatever the heck is after I knock the rest of those sides off. And then I'll go to the rotary platen to smooth things out a little bit more, and then I'll use a 1-inch scalloped belt on the slack just to kind of polish things out and work the little details and all that, just to kind of finish everything out. I can take the handle off of the belts at like a 600 grit, and then I'm going to hand sand just at 400 for now. I'm going to have to go back and polish it all the way out later, but I'm just doing 400 for now. Then I'm untaping the blade so that I can go test the thing. And man, this thing is scary. I've cut myself like 3 or 4 times already, and I'm sure it's going to get me a few more times before I'm completely done with this. Well, that's all for this video. In the next video, I'll be making a sheath just so I've got somewhere safe to put it, and then I'll be finishing it out and etching it to reveal the hamon. It's been a lot of fun so far, and make sure to stay tuned for future videos. Have a good one.